The school auditorium buzzed with voices that morning. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly with parents, teachers, and children dressed in their best clothes. It was Scholarship Day, the kind of event the entire town noticed, where local sponsors came to award bright students. I held my son's hand as we found a seat near the middle. He was 8 years old now. Nervous but proud, his hair neatly combed and his shirt tucked in just right. He had been chosen to receive one of the scholarships, and I wanted nothing more than to see his joy when they called his name. The banners hung above the stage read, "Annual Scholarship Ceremony, Building Our Future." Teachers whispered instructions, children shuffled papers, and I tried to steady my breath. For most parents, this was an ordinary day of celebration. For me, it would become something else entirely. The principal walked onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Today, we honor our students and also the generosity of those who make their dreams possible." Applause followed, then the words that froze me where I sat. "Our distinguished guest and sponsor this year, Mr. Daniel Carter." My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and then he appeared. Daniel, my ex-husband. The man who had once told me a child would ruin his future, who forced me into a clinic against my will, who walked away as if our marriage had been nothing. He stepped onto the stage with the same polished confidence I remembered. A dark suit, a perfect tie, and at his side, his girlfriend, younger, beautiful, smiling proudly. They looked like a couple from a magazine. The audience clapped as Daniel took the microphone. "It's an honor to be here," he said smoothly. "Our children are the foundation of tomorrow. Supporting their education is the greatest investment we can make." Parents nodded, teachers smiled, and the girlfriend beamed at him, but his words pierced me like glass. I had heard him once say children were nothing but a burden. Now he stood here, praised for his generosity, while the son he denied sat only a few rows away. My boy squeezed my hand. "Mom, that's the man giving the scholarships?" "Yes," I whispered, forcing a smile. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The ceremony continued. One by one, names were called. Children marched up to the stage, shaking Daniel's hand, receiving envelopes and applause. I prayed my son's name wouldn't echo in that hall, prayed we could slip out unnoticed. But fate had other plans. "And next," the principal announced, "we have one of our most promising students, James Carter." The room clapped. My son looked at me with wide eyes, then rose from his chair. His small shoulders squared with pride as he walked down the aisle toward the stage. Daniel's smile faltered. The boy climbed the steps, turned toward the crowd, and for the first time, Daniel saw him in full light. The same eyes, the same jawline, a reflection he could not deny. The hall was silent for a heartbeat, then filled again with clapping. But Daniel didn't move. His girlfriend glanced at him, confused, while his hand tightened around the envelope he held. And in that moment, under the bright lights of the school auditorium, I saw something I had never seen on his face before. Fear. People see me now as a teacher, a mother, someone steady. But before all this, I was a girl who believed in love too much, and in the wrong man. I met Daniel when I was 21, just out of college, still hopeful about the future. He was already working in finance, polished and confident, the kind of man who seemed to know exactly where he was going. He made me feel chosen, special, as if out of all the people in the world, he had picked me to stand beside him. We married quickly. I thought we were building a dream. But marriage stripped away the charm, layer by layer. Daniel had two voices, the one he used for the world, smooth, flattering, full of ambition, and the one he saved for me, sharp, demanding, always reminding me that his career came first. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought everything would change. I imagined him softening, holding me, planning names. Instead, he looked at me as though I had betrayed him. "This isn't the time," he said flatly. "You'll ruin everything. My promotion, my future, our life." "Our life," I whispered. "What about our child?" "There is no child," he snapped. "Not if you love me, not if you want me to succeed." I cried, begged, promised I could handle it, that I wouldn't let a baby hold him back. But he didn't bend. He made the appointment. He drove me to the clinic. He signed the papers as if I were too weak to think for myself. But sitting there, in that cold waiting room, something inside me shifted. I couldn't go through with it. When the nurse called my name, I told her no. I walked out, shaking, terrified but certain. Daniel was furious. "You're destroying us," he spat. "Do this or I'm done." And I said the bravest words of my life. Then we're done. The divorce was quick, brutal. He told people I was unstable, ungrateful, unfit to be a wife. I stayed silent. I let him walk away with his pride while I carried the truth inside me. 9 months later, I held my son in my arms. The first time he looked at me, tiny fists clenched, I knew I had chosen right. He was my miracle, my defiance, my proof that Daniel couldn't erase me. Those years weren't easy. I worked 2 jobs, leaned on my parents, stretched every dollar to keep us afloat. Nights were long, but mornings, when my boys' laughter filled the small apartment, were enough to keep me going. Daniel never called, never asked, never knew. The world believed I was a divorcee with no children, a woman who had wasted her marriage. I let them believe it. Protecting my son was more important than clearing my name. But sitting in that auditorium, watching Daniel on stage, all those memories came flooding back. He had erased me from his story, but the living proof of our past sat right there in the second row, waiting for his name to be called. And Daniel couldn't run from it forever. Life after Daniel was never easy, but it was mine. I raised my son in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, far enough from the places Daniel frequented. The walls were thin, the rent sometimes late, but it was home. I worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, juggling lesson plans during the day and grading papers after bedtime. My parents helped when they could, but most nights it was just me and my boy against the world. He was my light. Every morning, he'd stumble into the kitchen with messy hair, asking what adventure we'd have that day. Sometimes it was nothing more than walking to the park or reading a book together, but to him, it was magic. Watching him grow, seeing his curiosity bloom, made every sacrifice worth it. Still, whispers followed me. In a town this size, people never forget. She couldn't keep her husband. Didn't they say she had no children? Rumors tangled with half-truths, and I stopped trying to correct them. The truth wasn't theirs to hold, it was mine and my son's. At school, I built a reputation for being steady, dependable. My colleagues admired my dedication, though they never knew how many nights I collapsed in exhaustion. Parents thanked me for nurturing their children, unaware that my own child was the reason I poured so much into the classroom. For years, Daniel was nothing more than a shadow in my memory. I heard his name sometimes, articles in the local paper about his business ventures, photographs at charity galas with a beautiful woman at his side. He was praised as a man of vision, a pillar of the community. The same man who once told me a child would destroy him was now applauded for funding scholarships for kids. It stung, but I swallowed it. Let him have his stage. I had my son, and that was enough. Until the day our worlds collided again. When the school announced its annual scholarship ceremony, I didn't think twice. My son had been chosen as one of the recipients, and I was proud. He had worked hard, earned his place. We prepared together. He practiced his thank you speech, picked out his best shirt, and asked 100 times if I'd clap the loudest. Then I saw the program. The guest speaker, the sponsor, the man of the hour, Daniel Carter. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. It felt like the air had been stolen from my lungs. After all these years, after all the silence, he was coming back into our lives. Not privately, but in front of an entire auditorium. I told myself I could handle it. That I'd sit quietly, cheer for my son, and leave. But deep down, I knew this was more than chance. Life had brought him here, to the very stage where my son would stand, and there was no hiding anymore, because the truth I had protected for 8 years was about to step into the spotlight. Daniel always knew how to play a part. To the world, he was the picture of success. A sharp suit, a confident stride, the voice that carried authority. Newspapers called him a rising star in business. Photographs showed him at galas, shaking hands with city officials, smiling beside his beautiful girlfriend. He sponsored events, donated to schools, and positioned himself as a man who cared about the next generation. But I knew better. Behind closed doors, Daniel had been ruthless. He never shouted in public, but in our home, his words cut like knives. "Don't embarrass me. You'll ruin everything." He wanted control, and he took it piece by piece. Choosing my clothes, dismissing my opinions, isolating me from friends who dared to question him. When I got pregnant, I thought love would soften him. Instead, it revealed his true face. He didn't see a child, he saw an obstacle. His ambition outweighed everything else. He didn't ask, he demanded. And when I refused to bend, he tried to erase both me and our baby from his future. That was the man I divorced, the man I thought I had left behind. Yet here he was, years later, polished and applauded, using children as props to polish his image. The irony made me sick. The same man who had forced me to the clinic now stood on stage, praised as a benefactor of education, handing out scholarships as though he understood sacrifice. I had protected our son from his shadow. I had built a life where Daniel was nothing more than a scar I carried quietly. But now, that scar was bleeding again. During the scholarship ceremony, I watched him with narrowed eyes. He moved with confidence, shaking hands with the principal, whispering to his girlfriend, waving at the crowd. The parents applauded, the teachers thanked him. To them, he was a savior. To me, he was a fraud. And when the first children stepped onto the stage, his mask was flawless. He crouched to their level, shook their hands warmly, handed them envelopes with practiced charm. Cameras flashed. Parents sighed with admiration. But I knew what was coming. My son's name was on that list, and Daniel had no idea. The thought made my stomach twist. Part of me wanted to protect my child, to slip away before Daniel's eyes landed on him. But another part, the part that had carried this secret for 8 years, longed for the truth to shatter his perfect facade. Because Daniel's greatest fear wasn't failure. It was exposure. And my son was living proof of the truth he had tried so hard to bury. The principal's voice carried clearly through the microphone. And now, one of our most promising students, recipient of this year's academic scholarship, James Carter. My son's name echoed across the auditorium. I felt his small hand slip from mine as he stood, straightened his shirt, and walked down the aisle. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the applause. Daniel stood at the center of the stage, envelope in hand, smile fixed for the cameras. But as James climbed the steps and turned toward him, the smile cracked. It was subtle at first, a flicker in his eyes, a tightening of his jaw. Then came the stillness. His hand froze midair, as if paralyzed, because standing in front of him was not just another student. It was his mirror. The same dark eyes, the same jawline, even the stubborn way James held his shoulders, as if the world could not break him. Gasps rippled quietly through the audience. Parents leaned toward each other, whispering. Teachers glanced from the stage to the crowd, uncertain. My son looked at Daniel with innocent pride, unaware of the storm he had walked into. Congratulations, Daniel finally managed, his voice strained. He handed the envelope to James, but his fingers lingered as if gripping more than paper. His girlfriend, standing at the edge of the stage, tilted her head in confusion. Her smile faltered. She noticed it too. James accepted the envelope, bowed slightly like I had taught him, and turned to face the crowd. That was when the murmurs grew louder. He looks just like him, someone whispered from the back row. Isn't that the sponsor's son? Another muttered. I sat frozen in my chair, heat flooding my face. Every instinct screamed to protect my child, to grab his hand and run. But it was too late. The truth was no longer hidden. It was standing in the center of the stage, illuminated not by spotlights, but by the clarity of daylight and dozens of watching eyes. Daniel cleared his throat, tried to recover his composure. James Carter, he said loudly, forcing a smile for the audience. A fine student. We are proud of his accomplishments. But his eyes never left James's face. They darted once toward me, sharp and accusing, as if I had ambushed him, as if I had planned this moment. I held his gaze steady. I wanted him to see that this wasn't revenge, this was reality. The truth he had tried to erase was alive, breathing, holding a scholarship certificate in front of an entire community. The applause resumed, shaky at first, then stronger. James walked back down the steps, grinning, clutching his envelope. He slid into the seat beside me, whispering, "Did I do okay, Mom?" I brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "You did perfect." But inside, my chest was on fire. The facade Daniel had built for years had just cracked in front of everyone. And I knew this was only the beginning, because secrets never stay buried forever. That night, after the scholarship ceremony, the applause and whispers still rang in my ears. I sat by the window long after James had fallen asleep, staring out at the quiet street. The image of Daniel's face when he saw our son replayed again and again. his frozen smile, the way his eyes darted toward me, sharp with recognition. I should have felt vindicated. For years I carried the truth alone, and in one moment the mask slipped from him. But instead of triumph, all I felt was dread. The whispers in the auditorium weren't just whispers. They would spread. Parents would talk, teachers would speculate, and soon Daniel would be forced to act. Not as a father, but as the man who could not allow a scandal to tarnish his empire. I brewed tea to calm my nerves, but my hands shook so badly I spilled half the cup. Sitting at the kitchen table, I pressed my palms flat against the wood, whispering, "Stay strong, for him." James was blissfully unaware. The next morning, he bounded into the kitchen with his certificate, grinning. "Mom, did you see everyone clap for me? Even the sponsor smiled so big." I forced a smile, swallowing the truth. "You were amazing, I'm so proud." But my stomach twisted. How long until Daniel tried to twist this moment, to rewrite it in his favor? He had money, lawyers, influence. I had none of that. Just my son and the truth I'd protected for 8 years. That afternoon, as I picked James up from school, I noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, engine idling. My heart skipped. It didn't move even as parents and children streamed out around it. Only when I tightened my grip on James's hand and hurried him home did the car finally pull away. Panic clawed at me. He was watching. I double-checked the locks that night, then sat in James's room until he fell asleep, just to hear his steady breathing. Fear tried to drown me, whispering all the ways Daniel could rip our lives apart. But underneath the fear, something else began to stir. Anger. Anger at the years I spent silent while he thrived on lies. Anger at the thought of him using his power to intimidate me again. Anger that he might dare to see James as a threat rather than a son. I looked at my sleeping boy, his small hand curled into a fist on the pillow, and I knew I couldn't crumble. Not now, not when everything I had built was at stake. When I turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness, "You will not control me again." The words steadied me. For years, Daniel had been the one writing the story. But the night after the ceremony, I understood something vital. This time, I wasn't the girl who begged him to stay. I was a mother with nothing left to lose, and a truth that could destroy him. And maybe, just maybe, the fear I saw in his eyes that day was proof he knew it too. 2 days after the ceremony, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front. My stomach tightened as I carried it inside. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A photograph clipped from the local paper's coverage of the scholarship event. The image showed Daniel on stage, shaking James's hand. But someone had circled their faces in red ink and scrawled 3 words beneath it. "He knows already." My knees weakened. I sank into a chair, the paper trembling in my hands. Who had sent it? A friend? A warning? Or someone from Daniel's camp taunting me? I shoved the envelope aside, but a restless energy gripped me. I couldn't sit back and wait for Daniel to make his move. If he wanted a fight, I needed to know what he was planning. That night, after James was asleep, I pulled out the box I hadn't opened in years. Buried inside were the remnants of my marriage, old photos, receipts, letters, and at the bottom, folded carefully, the sonogram print from when I first learned I was pregnant. The tiny blur of life that Daniel had ordered me to erase. I stared at it, tears burning my eyes. That image had been my secret weapon, the proof I had carried through every sleepless night. I had hidden it away, afraid to confront the storm it represented. But now, maybe it was time. The next morning, as I left for school, I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. Another envelope. Inside was a typed note. "Meet me. You deserve to know the truth." A location and time were scribbled at the bottom, the coffee shop near Main Street. My hands shook as I folded the paper. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I went. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. In the corner, a woman sat alone, sunglasses hiding her eyes. When she lifted them, my breath caught. It was Claire, the woman Daniel had paraded on stage, his girlfriend. She leaned forward, her voice low. "I need to ask you something. That boy, James, he's Daniel's, isn't he?" My heart pounded. Words tangled in my throat. I had never expected her to reach out. Before I could answer, she pushed a folder across the table. I found these in his desk. Contracts, payments, documents he never wanted me to see. He's not who he pretends to be, and I think you already know that. Inside were financial statements, forged reports, evidence of fraud. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them. Daniel wasn't just a liar about family, he was a liar in business too. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. He'll come after you, but he's not untouchable. If you want to protect your son, you'll need this. I sat frozen, the folder heavy in my lap. For years I had believed my only weapon was the truth about James, but now I held something else, proof that Daniel's entire empire was built on lies. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. I left the cafe with the folder clutched tightly under my arm, Claire's words still echoing in my ears. For years, Daniel had seemed untouchable, his empire polished to perfection. Yet now I had proof of the cracks beneath the surface. That night, after James was asleep, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Bank statements, falsified contracts, and a list of donations that were nothing more than money laundered through fake charities. My hands shook as I traced the numbers. Daniel hadn't just lied about me, he had lied to the entire community. But buried near the back of the folder was something that made my breath stop. A birth certificate. My son's name, James Carter, typed neatly with my name listed as mother. But under father, the space was blank. My stomach turned. I had filed those papers alone, years ago, choosing not to name Daniel to keep him away. But how did Claire have this? Why was it in Daniel's possession? The realization hit me like a blow. Daniel had known all along. Somehow, he had gotten access to James's records. He had chosen to ignore it, to pretend my child didn't exist, while building his glittering career. But now that James stood in front of him, undeniable, Daniel's silence was cracking. The weight of it made me dizzy. He wasn't just afraid of exposure, he had been actively covering it up. I leaned back, pressing a hand to my mouth when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think you're safe. But I decide how this ends. My blood ran cold. I locked the door, checked the windows twice. Fear threatened to swallow me whole, but then my eyes fell on the birth certificate again. For 8 years, I had carried the truth alone. Now, I had both the truth and proof that Daniel's empire was built on lies. The next day at school, I confided in a colleague I trusted, Mrs. Green, a teacher who had been like a mentor to me. She listened quietly, then said, Melissa, men like Daniel don't change, but the world does care about evidence. Don't hide anymore, use it. Her words sank deep. For years I had chosen silence to protect James, but now silence was no longer protection, it was surrender. Later that week, I returned to the courthouse where my divorce had been finalized. Walking those halls again made my stomach twist, but I requested copies of the original filings. When the clerk handed me the packet, I flipped through the pages and froze. Tucked inside was an affidavit, signed by Daniel himself, stating that I had never carried a pregnancy during our marriage. A legal lie, written in black ink, filed to protect his spotless reputation. I nearly laughed from the bitter irony. He had sworn under oath that James never existed, and now James was a living, breathing contradiction. By the time I left the courthouse, the folder from Claire pressed against my ribs. I knew the tide had shifted. Daniel could intimidate me, stalk my street, send threats. But every move he made, every lie he told, was another crack in his armor. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin him as a father. It would destroy him as a man of business, as a community leader, as the polished figure he had worked so hard to create. I walked into the sunlight, clutching the documents, and whispered to myself, this time he won't bury me. I'll bury him. For years, I had lived in the shadows of silence, but after holding those documents in my hands, the fraudulent contracts, the falsified affidavit, the birth certificate, I felt something shift inside me. Fear had been my constant companion. Now, it was turning into fuel. I started small. Each morning, instead of staring at the mirror and seeing only the woman Daniel had broken, I began to reclaim her. I cut my hair, neat and sharp. I bought a new suit, one that fit like armor, rather than hand-me-down fabric that whispered of sacrifice. When I stood in front of the mirror, I didn't see the girl who had once begged for his love. I saw a woman ready to fight. My colleagues noticed. Melissa, you look different, one of them said with a smile. And I did. Not just on the outside, but in the way I carried myself. Shoulders straighter, voice steadier. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. At night, I stayed up after James went to bed, combing through every document Claire had given me. I made copies, organized files, highlighted key points. I knew Daniel would fight with everything he had, his money, his influence, his lies. But I also knew lies crumble under the weight of truth. Mrs. Green, the teacher I trusted, introduced me to a lawyer she knew. I sat in his office, nerves tight, as he flipped through the folder. "You realize," he said slowly, "if this goes public, Daniel's career is finished. This is fraud on a massive scale. Combined with your testimony about your child, it's more than enough to bring him down." I nodded, my palms damp. "I'm not doing this for revenge, I just want to protect my son." He leaned back, studying me. "Then you're ready. But be prepared. Once this starts, it won't stop until he falls." The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it steadied me. For too long, Daniel had dictated the story. Now, it was my turn to speak. One afternoon, James came home from school waving a flyer. "Mom, there's going to be a community gala next week. They said Mr. Carter is hosting again. Can we go?" I froze. A gala, public, crowded, filled with the very people who adored Daniel. The perfect stage for him to shine, and the perfect place for his lies to unravel. I knelt, smoothing James's hair. "Yes," I whispered, "we'll go." In the days leading up to it, I prepared like a soldier before battle. I rehearsed what I would say, the documents I would bring, the calm I would need to hold when the moment came. I was no longer the woman who let Daniel silence her in a clinic waiting room. I was a mother, a fighter, a survivor. On the night of the gala, as I zipped up my black dress and clasped the necklace my mother had given me, I caught my reflection one last time. My eyes were steady, my chin high. "Mom, you look amazing," James said, grinning. I kissed his cheek. "So do you." And as we stepped out into the night, walking toward the lights of the gala, I knew. The woman who had once been broken was gone. In her place stood someone Daniel would never recognize. Until it was too late. The gala glittered with chandeliers and polished marble floors, the kind of event where everyone wore their best smiles and finest clothes. My son held my hand tightly as we walked into the ballroom, our footsteps swallowed by the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Daniel stood at the front of the room, his arm draped around Claire's shoulders, laughing with city officials and reporters. His mask was flawless again, confident, generous, adored. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes when they swept across the crowd and landed on me. The program began with speeches from school leaders and local dignitaries, all praising Daniel's vision and commitment to children. My stomach twisted at the hypocrisy. When the applause rose, I gripped the folder of documents in my bag. My heart pounded like a drumbeat counting down to war. Finally, Daniel took the stage. The spotlight gleamed on his suit as he began. "It is an honor to invest in the future of our children." His words flowed smooth, rehearsed. People nodded, clapped, admired. And then, before he could finish, I rose from my chair. "Stop lying." The room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. My son clutched my arm, wide-eyed, but I stepped forward, my voice steady. "This man stands here pretending to care about children," I said, each word sharp as glass. "But when I carried his child, he forced me into a clinic and abandoned us. For years, he denied his own son." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Daniel's smile shattered. "Melissa," he hissed, "sit down." I didn't. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, holding it high. And it doesn't stop there. These documents prove his business is built on fraud, fake contracts, laundered money, lies stacked on lies. He has deceived this community as surely as he deceived me. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Murmurs erupted, growing louder with every second. Claire stepped back, her face pale, while Daniel stammered, "This is outrageous. She's unstable." But the crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. They were looking at my son, who stood bravely beside me, his features a mirror Daniel could no longer deny. The truth was written in his face, clearer than any document. The principal, flustered, rushed to the microphone. We need to investigate these claims." "You should," I said firmly. I handed the folder to a reporter in the front row. "The evidence is all there. The truth always finds its way out." Security moved toward Daniel as the room dissolved into chaos. Questions shouted, cameras flashing, whispers spreading like wildfire. Claire slipped away from his side, refusing to meet his eyes. And for the first time, Daniel stood alone. I held my son's hand tightly, guiding him toward the exit as the storm raged behind us. My knees trembled, but my spirit was unshaken. I had spoken, finally, and the silence that had bound me for 8 years was broken. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. My son looked up at me, confusion and pride mingling in his eyes. "Mom, are we gonna be okay?" I knelt, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Yes," I whispered, "because the truth is on our side, and the truth always wins." Behind us, the doors burst open, reporters spilling into the street, Daniel's name already unraveling under the weight of scandal. Justice had begun. Weeks passed, and the scandal grew louder. Headlines filled the papers, local businessmen under investigation for fraud. Daniel's empire crumbled piece by piece. Contracts dissolved, investors pulled away, and the community that once praised him now turned its back. He became a ghost of the man he had pretended to be, swallowed by the lies he had built. But in my home, peace began to bloom. James still carried his scholarship certificate proudly, but now he pinned it to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a star. Every time he walked by, he grinned. Life returned to its rhythm. School mornings, homework at the kitchen table, bedtime stories that ended in laughter instead of fear. One afternoon, as I graded papers, James came to me with a sheet of construction paper. "I made something," he said shyly. It was a drawing, crayon lines of a small house, a tree, and 2 figures holding hands, a woman with long hair and a boy with a wide smile. Above them, written in messy but determined letters, were the words, "My hero is Mom." Tears blurred my vision. I hugged him tightly, pressing my face into his hair. For years I had worried that my silence, my choices, my battles would scar him. But here he was, seeing not the pain but the strength. That night, as we ate dinner, he asked, "Mom, are we really okay now?" I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Yes, sweetheart, we're better than okay. We're free." The weight I had carried for 8 years was gone. No more hiding, no more fear, just me and my son, standing in the light of truth. And as I tucked him into bed, listening to his soft breathing, I realized something profound. The story wasn't about what Daniel had taken from me. It was about what I had kept. Love, resilience, and a future worth fighting for. For the first time in a long time, I slept soundly, knowing tomorrow held not shadows, but hope.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.